During the live broadcast, the single sentence Jasmine read shook all of America. "I am not the First Lady, I am just a contracted wife." When these words, written in Melania's own handwriting, appeared on screens, it took Trump exactly 15 seconds to completely lose control. The secret clauses of the marriage contract, the conditions for having children, and the silence money. Everything was being proven with documents. The morning air inside the Capitol building felt different that day. Not the usual stale mixture of power and politics, but something electric, dangerous, like the moment before lightning strikes. The marble corridors echoed with hushed conversations and hurried footsteps, but beneath it all was an undercurrent of anticipation that made even the most seasoned staffers nervous. Jasmine Crockett walked through those hallways with the steady gait of someone who knew exactly what she was carrying and exactly what it would cost. The red leather folder tucked under her arm wasn't just evidence. It was a nuclear weapon disguised as paperwork. Behind her, a small entourage of aides followed at a respectful distance, their faces masks of professional calm that barely concealed their own anxiety about what was to come. The hearing room was already packed when she arrived. Every seat filled, every camera angle covered, every major network represented. This wasn't supposed to be a blockbuster hearing. Officially, it was about campaign finance reform and transparency in political marriages. But word had leaked that Congresswoman Crockett had something explosive, and in Washington, the smell of blood in the water draws sharks from every direction. Donald Trump sat at the witness table, his usual swagger on full display. The navy suit, the red tie, the practiced smirk that had carried him through decades of scandals and controversies. He looked comfortable, confident, like a man who had weathered storms before and expected to weather this one too. His legal team flanked him on both sides. Expensive suits, expensive educations, expensive hourly rates that bought silence and manufactured innocence. But there was something different in the air that morning, something that made even Trump's most loyal defenders shift uncomfortably in their seats. Maybe it was the way Jasmine had walked in, not with the theatrical flourish of someone looking for camera time, but with the quiet determination of someone carrying truth like a loaded gun. Maybe it was the unusual silence from the Trump camp. No preemptive attacks, no character assassinations, no leaked counterclaims to muddy the waters. Or maybe it was simply that everyone in that room, on some primitive level, could sense that they were about to witness something unprecedented. Jasmine approached the microphone with the kind of calm that comes from absolute certainty. She didn't shuffle papers or clear her throat or engage in any of the theatrical warm-up acts that usually preceded major revelations. She simply looked directly into the main camera, knowing that millions of Americans were watching, and began to speak. "Mr. Trump," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics, "the American people have been told many stories about your marriage to Melania. Love at first sight, a fairy tale romance, a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine affection." She paused, letting the familiar narrative settle in the room like dust on old furniture. "Today, we're going to examine the paperwork behind that fairy tale." The first document appeared on the overhead screen, and immediately the room's energy shifted. It was a contract, dense with legal language, dated January 22, 2005, exactly 3 months before Donald and Melania's wedding. The header read, "Personal Services and Public Representation Agreement." "This document," Jasmine continued, "was drafted by the law firm of Morrison, Kessler and Associates, specialists in what they euphemistically call high net worth relationship structuring. In simpler terms, they write contracts for rich men who want to purchase the appearance of love." Trump's lawyer immediately stood. "Objection, Your Honor. This isn't a courtroom, counselor," the committee chairman interrupted. "This is Congress, and the Congresswoman has the floor." Jasmine nodded her thanks and continued. "Let's examine some specific clauses. Section 4.2, Party B, that's Melania, agrees to maintain public appearances consistent with the image requirements of Party A, that's Mr. Trump, including, but not limited to wardrobe selection, public statements, and social interactions." She clicked to the next page. Section 4.7. Party B will participate in no fewer than 12 joint public appearances per calendar year, with additional appearances subject to negotiation and supplemental compensation. The numbers were starting to sink in. This wasn't a marriage contract. It was an employment agreement with romantic window dressing. But perhaps most revealing is Section 9.1, Jasmine said, her voice dropping slightly. Party B acknowledges that the success of this arrangement depends upon the maintenance of specific public narratives and agrees to refrain from any public or private communications that might contradict established storylines. She looked up from the document, her eyes finding Trumps across the chamber. In other words, Mr. Trump, you didn't just marry Melania. You hired her to play the role of your wife. The second document was more personal, more devastating. It was a journal entry, photographed and authenticated by 3 separate handwriting experts, dated November 9, 2016, the day after the election that made Donald Trump president and Melania Trump the First Lady. The handwriting was unmistakably feminine, flowing script in blue ink on cream-colored personal stationery. Jasmine read it aloud, her voice steady, but somehow conveying the pain embedded in every word. The world congratulates me today, but I feel like I'm accepting condolences. Donald won, which means I won too, I suppose. But my victory feels like a cage made of gold and photographed from every angle. The camera zoomed in on specific lines as Jasmine continued. I remember when I was young in Slovenia, I dreamed of America as a place where you could be anyone, become anything. I never imagined I would become a character in someone else's story, playing a role I never auditioned for in a script I'm not allowed to read. The silence in the chamber was absolute. Even the court reporters had stopped typing, caught up in the raw humanity of words that were never meant for public consumption. But this is the line that cuts deepest, Jasmine said, her voice barely above a whisper. I am not the First Lady. I am just a contracted wife. The world sees grace where I feel chains. They applaud my silence, not knowing it was purchased. Trump shot to his feet, his face flushing red. This is a lie, a complete fabrication. My wife never wrote those words. But Jasmine was already clicking to the next slide. Bank records, wire transfers, payment schedules. These financial documents tell a different story, Mr. Trump. Monthly payments of $50,000 to an account titled Personal Maintenance Fund, managed by your organization but accessible only to Melania. She highlighted specific entries. But notice the pattern. In months when Melania made fewer public appearances, the payments decreased. In months when she was more publicly visible, campaign rallies, state dinners, media interviews, the payments increased proportionally. Performance bonuses, someone in the press gallery murmured, loud enough to be caught by the microphones. Exactly, Jasmine confirmed. This wasn't spousal support. This was compensation for services rendered. Your wife wasn't living off your wealth. She was earning it, appearance by appearance, smile by smile, silent year by silent year. The medical records were the most damaging evidence yet. Jasmine had obtained them through a whistleblower at Walter Reed Medical Center, a nurse who had been present during Melania's hospitalization in May 2018. The mysterious kidney procedure that kept the First Lady out of public view for nearly a month. The official story, Jasmine said, was a minor kidney condition requiring routine treatment. But the actual medical files tell a very different story. The psychiatrist's notes appeared on screen, carefully redacted to protect doctor-patient privilege but still devastatingly clear. Patient presence with severe anxiety, depression, and what she describes as performance exhaustion. When asked about her support system, patient became distressed and stated, I can't talk about my real feelings with anyone. It's not allowed. Everything I say, everything I do has to be approved. I feel like I'm disappearing inside a role I never wanted to play. The room had gone beyond silence into something approaching reverence. This wasn't political theater anymore. It was human tragedy played out on the national stage. Jasmine continued reading. Patient expresses feelings of isolation, and describes her public life as an elaborate performance where the audience never goes home. When asked about her marriage, Patient states, "Love was never part of the contract. I thought it might grow, but you can't love someone who sees you as a business asset." Trump's lawyers were frantically whispering among themselves, but their client had gone completely still. The bluster, the interruptions, the performative outrage, all of it had evaporated, leaving behind only a man confronting the documented reality of what he had done to the woman who shared his name. "The attending physician's final note," Jasmine said, "recommends immediate psychological counseling and suggests that the patient's condition is directly related to what he terms prolonged identity suppression in a high-pressure public environment." She looked up from the medical records. "In other words, Mr. Trump, your wife was hospitalized not for a kidney condition, but for the psychological trauma of being erased while the whole world was watching." Perhaps the most chilling document was saved for last. A supplemental agreement dated March 2006, shortly after Barron's birth. The header read, "Addendum to Personal Services Agreement, Parental Obligations and Limitations." This document, Jasmine explained, outlines the terms under which Melania would be permitted to raise her son. Section 2.3 is particularly revealing. Party B acknowledges that any children produced during this arrangement are considered joint assets of the partnership, with final decision-making authority residing with Party A. The implications sank in slowly, horribly. Even the child wasn't truly hers. Section 3.1. Parenting decisions, including but not limited to education, religious instruction, public appearances, and media exposure, require pre-approval from Party A or designated representatives. Jasmine's voice hardened. And Section 4.6? In the event of contract termination, custody arrangements will be determined solely by Party A, with Party B's access subject to continued compliance with confidentiality agreements. She set the document down with deliberate care. This means, Mr. Trump, that even as a mother, Melania was never truly free. You didn't just control her public image and private statements, you controlled her relationship with her own child. The chamber had descended into a kind of shocked quiet that felt almost sacred. This wasn't politics anymore. This was the systematic documentation of psychological and emotional abuse, dressed up in legal language and hidden behind the facade of America's most famous marriage. But it was the final piece of evidence that truly broke the dam. Jasmine pulled out a small device, a digital audio recorder, and placed it carefully on the table in front of her. "This recording," she said, "was made by Melania herself on December 23, 2016, just weeks before the inauguration. It was discovered in her personal belongings by Secret Service during a routine security sweep, but the contents were never reported up the chain of command. The agent who found it kept it, and last month he came forward." She pressed play, and Melania's voice filled the chamber. Not the carefully modulated public voice Americans knew, but something raw, broken, desperate. "I don't know who will ever hear this. I hope no one. I hope someone. I can't tell anymore. In 3 weeks, I become the First Lady of the United States, and I have never felt so powerless in my life." The recording crackled with emotion. "People think I'm lucky. They think I have everything. They don't understand that having everything means being nothing. I can't speak without permission. I can't think without wondering if my thoughts are approved. I can't even hold my son without considering how it will look in photographs." Trump had gone completely pale. His hands gripped the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles had turned white. Melania's voice continued. "If something happens to me, I want people to know that this wasn't love. This was never love. This was a transaction, and I was the commodity being sold. The American people deserve to know that their First Lady is essentially an employee, playing a role in someone else's political ambitions." The recording ended, and the silence that followed was deafening. Jasmine stood slowly, her movements deliberate and respectful, as if she were concluding a funeral service rather than a congressional hearing. The documents we've examined today, she said, paint a picture of systematic control, emotional manipulation, and the commodification of human relationships for political gain. But beyond the legal language and financial arrangements, they tell the story of a woman who was gradually erased while the whole world watched. She gestured to the evidence spread across the table. Marriage contracts, performance requirements, payment schedules, custody limitations, medical records documenting psychological trauma, and finally, a woman's own voice, speaking truth in the darkness because she had nowhere else to turn. Her voice grew stronger, more passionate. This isn't just about Donald and Melania Trump. This is about power, how it operates, how it controls, how it purchases silence and manufactures consent. It's about the price we pay when we allow public figures to treat human beings as props in their personal narratives. She turned to face Trump directly. You didn't marry Melania, Mr. Trump. You acquired her. You didn't build a family. You constructed a brand. And the cost of that construction was measured not just in dollars, but in dignity, autonomy, and the basic human right to be authentic. The camera caught Trump's expression, a mixture of rage, humiliation, and something that might have been recognition of his own actions reflected back at him. The American people were sold a love story, Jasmine continued. They were told they were witnessing a fairy tale romance between a powerful man and a beautiful woman. But fairy tales are fiction, and what we've documented here today is the receipt for that fiction. As Jasmine gathered her papers preparing to conclude, Trump finally found his voice. But it wasn't the bombastic, confident voice that had dominated American politics for years. It was smaller, defensive, almost pleading. You don't understand, he said, his words tumbling over each other. Marriage is complicated. Every marriage has its arrangements, its understandings. We were happy. She was happy. The media, the pressure. It was hard on everyone. But his words rang hollow in the face of the evidence. Documents don't lie. Bank records don't fabricate emotions. Medical files don't manufacture psychological trauma for political convenience. Jasmine paused at the exit, turning back one final time. Mr. Trump, happiness isn't something you can contract for. Love isn't something you can purchase with monthly payments. And dignity isn't something you can schedule into public appearances. Her final words were delivered not with anger or triumph, but with a kind of profound sadness for what had been lost, what had been destroyed, what had been bought and sold in the marketplace of political ambition. Melania Trump wrote in her own hand that she was just a contracted wife. Today, we've seen the contract. We've seen the payments. We've seen the human cost. She hefted the red folder one last time. And we've learned that some silences aren't chosen. They're purchased. And today, America has seen the receipt. The hearing ended, but the reverberations continued for months. Within hours, Don's contracted wife was trending worldwide. News anchors struggled to find appropriate language for what they had witnessed. Legal experts debated the implications of marriages that were, in essence, business transactions with romantic window dressing. But perhaps most importantly, the myth of the perfect political marriage had been shattered, not with gossip or speculation, but with documents, receipts, bank records, and the recorded words of a woman who had been silent for far too long. In congressional offices across Washington, staffers quietly began reviewing their own boss's financial arrangements, wondering how many other fairy tale relationships might be hiding similar dark truths. And somewhere, in a secure location that would never be disclosed, Melania Trump listened to news reports about her own liberation with emotions too complex for any contract to capture or control. The silence had finally been broken. The truth had finally been told. And America would never look at political marriages the same way again. In her own handwriting, preserved forever in the congressional record, Melania had written the truth that would outlive every speech, every campaign, every carefully crafted public appearance. I am not the First Lady, I am just a contracted wife. And now, finally, the world had heard her. This dramatized story is inspired by themes of power, silence, and the cost of public life. All characters and dialogue are fictionalized for commentary and education. It is not intended to defame or mislead, but to inspire reflection on the nature of power, marriage, and authenticity in public life. Thanks for watching. Truth isn't over. It's just waiting for someone to hear.